The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty streets of a small town where life moved at its own slow pace. In a cramped workshop filled with the smell of motor oil and metal, a 14-year-old boy sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, completely absorbed in taking apart an old radio. His fingers were stained with grease and sweat dripped from his forehead, but he didn't care. This was where he felt most alive. Arav had always been different from other kids his age. While his classmates spent their free time playing cricket in the streets or watching movies on their phones, he found himself drawn to things that others threw away. Broken fans, old television sets, burnt-out circuit boards, anything with wires and components fascinated him. His father owned a small motorcycle repair shop, barely making enough to feed the family, but it was Arav's paradise. Every evening after school, he would rush to the workshop, eager to explore whatever new broken item had arrived. His mother sold vegetables at the local market, waking up before dawn every day to arrange her small cart. She would watch her son with a mixture of pride and worry. Pride because he was so curious and intelligent. Worry because they couldn't afford to give him the education or opportunities he deserved. When Arav asked for a computer, she had cried silently that night, knowing they barely had enough money for his school books. A computer was a luxury that felt as distant as the moon. But Arav didn't complain. He understood his family's situation better than most kids his age. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, he decided to find another way. One day, while helping his father at the shop, he noticed a pile of electronic waste that a customer had dumped outside. Most people saw garbage, but Arav saw possibility. He asked his father if he could keep some of the items, and his father, seeing the excitement in his son's eyes, agreed with a gentle smile. That pile of trash became Arav's first collection. He carefully sorted through circuit boards looking for components that still worked. He discovered that even broken devices had parts that were perfectly fine. A dead computer might have a working hard drive. A burnt motherboard might still have usable memory chips. He started spending hours at the local junkyard, becoming friends with the owner who would save interesting electronic items for him. His small bedroom transformed into something that looked like a mad scientist's laboratory. Wires hung from the ceiling, circuit boards covered his study table, and boxes of components were stacked in every corner. His younger sister complained about the mess and his mother worried about the safety hazards, but Arav was in heaven. He had created his own workshop with nothing but discarded dreams of others. School was a different story. Arav attended a government school where the computer lab had 5 ancient desktop computers for 200 students. He rarely got a chance to use them, and when he did, they were so slow that he could barely practice anything meaningful. His classmates didn't understand his obsession with electronics. They called him names, made fun of his oil-stained clothes, and laughed when they saw him carrying bags of scrap metal home from the junkyard. The bullying hurt, but Arav learned to ignore it. He knew something they didn't. He knew that knowledge wasn't locked inside expensive schools or fancy coaching classes. It was everywhere, free for anyone willing to look for it. He discovered that the local library had internet access for 1 hour per day. He would run there straight after school, not even stopping for lunch, just to watch YouTube tutorials on electronics and programming. The librarian, an elderly man named Mr. Sharma, noticed the dedicated young boy who came every single day. He saw how Arav would frantically scribble notes, trying to capture as much information as possible before his hour ran out. One day, Mr. Sharma did something kind. He gave Arav an extra hour and then another. He saw potential in this boy that reminded him of his own youth, when dreams felt bigger than circumstances. Arav taught himself everything. He learned about circuits by watching videos and then practicing on his scrap components. He learned programming by reading old books that the library was going to throw away. Python, C++, Java, he absorbed everything like a sponge. When he didn't understand something, he would watch the same video 10 times, 20 times until it made sense. There were no teachers to ask questions, no classmates to discuss problems with. It was just him, his determination, and the treasure trove of free knowledge on the internet. His first real project was a small LED light that he powered using a solar panel he had built from broken garden lights. It took him 3 months of failures, burnt fingers, and countless restarts. But when that tiny LED finally glowed in the darkness, powered by nothing but the sun and his own creation, Arav felt something he had never felt before. He felt like he could do anything. His father noticed the change in his son. Despite working 12 hours a day at the repair shop, He would sit with Arav late into the night, holding a flashlight so his son could work on his projects during the frequent power cuts that plagued their neighborhood. He didn't understand circuits or programming, but he understood dreams. He had given up his own dreams years ago to feed his family, but he was determined that his son would not have to do the same. The house was small, just 2 rooms for a family of 4, but it was filled with something that money couldn't buy. It was filled with hope. Arav's mother would save a few rupees from her vegetable sales whenever she could, hiding them in an old steel box. She didn't tell anyone, but she was saving for a laptop for her son. It would take years at her pace, but she was determined. As months passed, Arav's collection grew, and so did his skills. He built a small robot from scrap metal that could move forward and backward. He created a basic calculator using old electronic components. He programmed a simple game on the library computer during his precious internet hours. Each project taught him something new, and each failure made him stronger. His teachers at school started noticing too. His science teacher, Mrs. Kapoor, saw that Arav wasn't like other students. When she taught about electrical circuits, he already knew more than what was in the textbook. He would ask questions that made her research answers. She began staying after school to help him, giving him her old science magazines and encouraging him to think bigger. But not everyone was supportive. The school principal thought Arav was wasting his time with unrealistic dreams. He called his parents one day and advised them to focus on getting their son into a practical trade like plumbing or electrical work. Education was expensive and dreams were luxuries that poor families couldn't afford, he said. Arav's mother cried again that night, but his father held her hand and said something that changed everything. He said their son was special, and special people don't follow normal paths. Arav overheard this conversation. He was supposed to be sleeping, but the walls were thin and voices carried. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling covered with posters of scientists and inventors he had cut out from old magazines. That night he made a promise to himself. He would prove everyone wrong. He would show the world that genius doesn't need money. It just needs opportunity and determination. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The scrap metal he collected, the videos he watched, the circuits he built, they were all preparing him for something bigger. In a small bedroom in a forgotten part of town, a revolution was beginning, and it was being built with nothing but garbage, dreams, and the stubborn refusal to accept that poverty decides destiny. The monsoon season arrived, bringing relief from the heat but also leaking roofs and muddy streets. Arav would cover his precious components with plastic sheets to protect them from the rain that seeped through the ceiling. His sister would complain about the constant smell of solder and burning plastic, but she also felt proud when neighbors asked about her genius brother. Word was spreading in their small community about the boy who could fix anything and build gadgets from trash. And as Arav sat on his bedroom floor on yet another rainy evening, surrounded by his collection of discarded electronics, he had no idea that within a year, the world's biggest technology company would be calling his name. He was just a boy with dirty hands and big dreams, doing what he loved in the only way he knew how. But sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. Arav was now 15, and his small bedroom laboratory had become legendary in his neighborhood. People brought him their broken phones, radios, and fans, and more often than not, he could fix them. He never charged much, just enough to buy a few components for his next project. But deep down, he wanted to do something bigger, something that would actually matter. The idea came to him on a Sunday afternoon when he visited his uncle's farm outside the town. His uncle, Ravi, was sitting on the ground near his fields, his face buried in his hands. The entire crop was ruined. What should have been a field of healthy green plants was now a wasteland of yellow, dying vegetation. Arav walked through the dried, cracked soil, examining the plants closely. His uncle explained that by the time he noticed the disease, it was too late. Half the village faced the same problem, and no one knew what had gone wrong until the damage was done. That night, Arav couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his uncle's tired face, the wasted months of hard work, the money lost, the families that would struggle. Farming wasn't just a job in his community, it was survival. When crops failed, people went hungry. Children dropped out of school because their parents couldn't afford fees. Dreams died in those fields along with the plants. He started researching plant diseases during his library hours. He discovered that early detection was everything. If farmers could identify diseases in the first few days, they could save their crops. But the problem was that most farmers couldn't afford plant pathologists or expensive diagnostic services. They relied on experience and luck, and sometimes that wasn't enough. Then Arav stumbled upon something fascinating. He read about artificial intelligence being used to identify diseases through images. Big agricultural companies in developed countries were using these technologies, but they cost thousands of dollars. The software required expensive cameras, powerful computers, and internet connectivity. It was perfect technology for rich farmers in America or Europe, but completely useless for someone like his uncle who barely made enough to feed his family. But what if he could build something different? Something cheap, something that didn't need internet, something that could work in fields with no electricity? The idea consumed him. He stopped working on his other projects and focused entirely on this new challenge. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, image recognition, these were advanced concepts that even university students struggled with. But Arav had never let difficulty stop him before. His first challenge was getting a camera. He needed something that could take clear pictures of plants. New cameras were expensive, so he did what he always did. He went to the junkyard. After weeks of searching, he found a broken smartphone with a cracked screen but a working camera. The phone cost him 50 rupees, money he had saved from repairing a neighbor's television. He carefully extracted the camera module, treating it like a surgeon performing a delicate operation. Next, he needed a computer brain for his device. Real computers were out of the question, but he had heard about something called Raspberry Pi, a tiny, affordable computer about the size of a credit card. The problem was that even the cheapest Raspberry Pi cost more money than his family could spare. He posted a request on an online forum explaining his project and asking if anyone had an old unit they didn't need anymore. Days passed with no response, and he felt his hope fading. Then a miracle happened. A college student from another city sent him a message. He had an old Raspberry Pi from a failed school project and was willing to donate it if Arav paid for shipping. Arav rushed to his mother explaining the opportunity. She looked at her vegetable money, did some mental calculations, and handed him 200 rupees. It was money meant for groceries, but she saw the fire in her son's eyes and couldn't say no. When the tiny computer arrived, Arav held it like it was made of gold. This small circuit board would become the brain of his invention. But he still needed power. His device would be used in fields with no electricity, so it needed to run on solar energy. He remembered his first project, the LED light with the homemade solar panel. He could do this again, but bigger and better. He collected broken solar garden lights from people's trash. Each small light had a tiny solar panel, and while one wasn't enough, maybe 10 or 20 combined would work. He spent weeks carefully connecting them, testing different configurations, burning out components, and starting over. His room smelled constantly of melted plastic and solder. His sister refused to sleep there anymore and moved to the living room floor. But the hardest part wasn't the hardware. It was the software. Arav needed to create an artificial intelligence that could recognize plant diseases. This required machine learning, a field so complex that companies hired entire teams of PhDs to work on it. And here was a 15-year-old boy with no formal training, trying to do it alone in his bedroom. He started learning Python machine learning libraries during his library hours. He watched lectures from MIT and Stanford professors on YouTube, pausing every few seconds to write notes because he couldn't afford to miss anything. He learned about neural networks, training datasets, and image classification. The concepts made his head hurt, but he pushed through, watching the same lectures 5, 10, sometimes 20 times until they made sense. The biggest challenge was creating a dataset. Machine learning needed thousands of images of both healthy and diseased plants to learn from. Professional researchers had teams collecting this data, but Arav had only himself. So he started walking. Every weekend he would walk to different farms asking farmers if he could photograph their crops. He took pictures of healthy plants, sick plants, different diseases, different stages of infection. He walked miles under the hot sun, his phone camera clicking constantly, his notebook filling with observations. Farmers thought he was crazy. Some laughed at him. Others felt sorry for the young boy who seemed to be wasting his time. But a few, like his uncle Ravi, believed in him. They let him spend hours in their fields, gave him water when he was thirsty, and shared their knowledge about different plant diseases. These farmers became his teachers, explaining how to spot early signs of infection that even the human eye could barely detect. Months passed, and Arav's collection grew to over 3,000 images. His laptop, an ancient machine that his teacher Mrs. Kapoor had given him from her attic, struggled to process the data. It would freeze constantly, sometimes taking hours to complete simple tasks. He learned patience, starting processes before going to school and checking them when he returned. Sometimes the laptop would crash and he would lose hours of work, but he never gave up. Training the AI model was a nightmare on his slow computer. What should have taken hours took days. The laptop would overheat, shutting down randomly. Arav would place it on the cold floor tiles, trying to cool it down, sometimes even putting it in front of the fan. His mother would watch her son sleeping next to his computer, waiting for a process to complete, and her heart would ache with a mixture of pride and sadness. Finally, after 6 months of continuous work, his AI model was ready. It could identify 5 common plant diseases with decent accuracy. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Now came the moment of truth, putting everything together. He assembled his creation on his study table. The smartphone camera connected to the Raspberry Pi, the homemade solar panel providing power, and his AI software running on the tiny computer. It looked like a mess, like something from a science fiction movie made by someone with no budget. Wires stuck out everywhere, held together with electrical tape and hope. The casing was made from an old plastic container he had found in the trash. His father looked at the device and asked gently if it would actually work. Arav honestly didn't know. He had done everything right in theory, but theory and reality were different things. There was only one way to find out. He needed to test it in a real field. The next Sunday, Arav carried his creation to his uncle's farm. His uncle's friends had gathered, curious to see what the boy had built. Some came to support him, others came to watch him fail. Arav's hands trembled as he set up the device. He pointed the camera at a plant that looked slightly yellow. His uncle said it was probably fine, just needing more water. The device processed the image and Arav held his breath. 3 seconds later, the small screen showed a result. Bacterial leaf blight, early stage. His uncle was skeptical. The plant looked almost healthy. But Arav insisted they check more carefully. When they examined the plant closely, they found tiny spots on the underside of leaves, spots that would have gone unnoticed for another week. By then, the disease would have spread to dozens of plants. They tested 10 more plants. The device correctly identified 7 diseases, missed 1, and gave 2 false positives. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. More importantly, it had caught infections that the farmers had missed. Arav's uncle hugged him tightly, tears in his eyes. This wasn't just a school project. This was something that could actually help people. Word spread quickly through the farming community. Other farmers wanted to try the device. Arav spent weekends going from field to field, testing his creation and collecting more data to improve his AI. Each test taught him something new, and he constantly updated his software. The device started getting better, more accurate, faster. His science teacher, Mrs. Kapoor, heard about what he was doing. She was amazed. She told him about a national science competition for young innovators, where students from all over the country presented their projects. The prizes included scholarships, mentorship, and national recognition. She insisted that Arav should participate, but there was a problem. The competition was in the capital city, hundreds of miles away. Arav would need money for travel, accommodation, and registration fees. His family didn't have that kind of money. They barely managed their daily expenses. His father worked overtime at the repair shop. His mother sold extra vegetables, but there was never anything left over. When the community heard that their young genius couldn't attend the competition because of money, something beautiful happened. The farmers whom Arav had helped started contributing. 10 rupees here, 20 rupees there, whatever they could spare. His uncle organized a small collection. Even the junkyard owner who had supplied him with scrap contributed. The entire neighborhood came together, proving that sometimes the poorest communities have the biggest hearts. In 3 weeks, they collected enough money for Arav's trip. His mother packed his bag with homemade food and his one good shirt. His father gave him advice about staying safe in the big city. His sister made him promise to call every day, and Mrs. Kapoor coached him on how to present his project. how to speak confidently, how to handle questions from judges. The night before he left, Arav sat in his messy bedroom, looking at his device. It was ugly, definitely not sophisticated, held together with tape and prayers. But it worked, and it mattered. That was all that counted. He carefully packed it in an old cardboard box, wrapping it with cloth to protect it during the journey. He didn't know what would happen at the competition. He just knew he had to try. As he fell asleep that night, Arav thought about his uncle's dying crops, about farmers who lost everything to diseases they couldn't detect, about problems that technology could solve if only it was accessible to everyone. His device might be made from trash, but the idea behind it was pure gold, and sometimes that's all the world needs. A good idea and someone brave enough to make it real. The train journey to the capital city took 14 hours, and Arav barely slept. He kept his cardboard box close to his chest, afraid that someone might accidentally kick it or that the device might get damaged. Through the window, he watched the landscape change from rural farmlands to industrial areas and finally to the sprawling cityscape. He had never been so far from home, and everything felt overwhelming and exciting at the same time. When he arrived at the competition venue, his heart sank. The building was massive, modern, with glass walls and automatic doors. Inside, students from across the country were setting up their projects on neat display tables. Most came from expensive private schools, wearing branded clothes and carrying professional-looking presentations. Their projects were polished, with glossy posters, 3D printed models, and sleek prototypes that looked like they came from technology stores. And then there was Arav, in his carefully washed but faded shirt, carrying a cardboard box with a device held together by electrical tape. He felt completely out of place. Students stared at him as he walked by, some whispering to their friends. He found his assigned table, number 47, tucked away in a corner of the massive hall. His hands shook slightly as he unpacked his creation. The device looked even worse here than it did in his bedroom. Next to the sophisticated projects around him, it looked like actual garbage. A girl at the next table from an elite school in Mumbai had a beautifully designed water purification system with touch screens and LED displays. She glanced at Arav's device and tried to hide her smirk. He saw it, though, and felt his confidence crumbling. He spent an hour setting up, trying to make his presentation area look respectable. He had handwritten his project description on cardboard sheets because he couldn't afford to print them. His demonstration photos were simple printouts from the library's printer, already fading and wrinkled from the journey. Compared to the professional presentations around him, it looked like a school kid's homework. The competition began, and judges started walking through the aisles, spending a few minutes at each project. Arav watched them appreciating the polished presentations, nodding approvingly at the well-spoken students from famous schools. His stomach churned with anxiety. What was he doing here? These students had resources, training, and support that he could only dream of. They probably had entire teams helping them. Meanwhile, he had built everything alone in his cramped bedroom. When the judges finally reached his table, he took a deep breath and started explaining his project. His voice wavered at first, but as he spoke about the problem he was trying to solve, about farmers losing crops, about his uncle's field, his voice grew stronger. He demonstrated how his device worked, pointing the camera at a sample plant image and showing how it identified diseases. One judge, an elderly professor from a prestigious university, looked skeptical. He asked Arav how much the device cost to build. $30, Arav answered, equivalent to about 2,500 rupees. The judge's eyebrows went up. He asked about the accuracy rate. 78% so far, Arav explained, but improving with more data. The judge asked about the solar panel, and Arav explained how he had built it from broken garden lights. Another judge, a woman who worked at a big technology company, picked up the device carefully, examining it from all angles. She could see the smartphone camera, the obvious scrap components, the handmade solar panel. She asked Arav where he had learned machine learning. YouTube and library books, he answered honestly. She looked surprised. Without any formal training? Arav nodded. The judges exchanged glances that he couldn't quite read. After they left, Arav felt deflated. The interview had lasted maybe 10 minutes, shorter than the time they spent with other projects. He was sure they hadn't taken him seriously. How could they? His project looked like a toy compared to the others. He sat at his table, watching other students confidently answer questions, their expensive projects gleaming under the hall lights. During lunch break, he sat alone, eating the parathas his mother had packed. Other students gathered in groups talking about their schools and their projects. No one approached Arav. He felt invisible, like he didn't belong in this world of privilege and polish. He thought about his father working in the hot repair shop, his mother waking up before dawn to sell vegetables all so he could be here. And he was failing them. But something unexpected happened that afternoon. A man with a camera approached Arav's table. He introduced himself as Vikram, a technology journalist who covered innovation stories. He had overheard the judges talking about a boy who built an AI device from scrap, and he was curious. Could he see a demonstration? Arav's hands were steadier this time. He explained his project again, but this time he spoke from his heart. He talked about his community, about farmers he knew personally, about real problems that needed real solutions. He explained that technology shouldn't just be for people who could afford it. Why should a poor farmer lose everything because he couldn't pay for expensive disease detection, when the same technology could be built affordably? Vikram listened intently, asking questions, taking photos, recording video on his phone. He was fascinated not just by the device, but by the story behind it. A 15-year-old boy from a small town, teaching himself advanced programming, building artificial intelligence from electronic waste, driven by a desire to help his community. This wasn't just a school project, it was a story of innovation born from necessity. After talking with Arav for almost an hour, Vikram asked if he could write an article about him. Arav agreed, not thinking much of it. Journalists talked to many people, and articles got written and forgotten every day. He had no idea that this conversation would change his life forever. The competition results were announced that evening. Arav didn't win first place. That went to a team from Delhi, who had created an advanced robotics system with funding from their school. He didn't even win second place. But he won third place, and more importantly, he won a special recognition award for innovation with limited resources. When they called his name, he walked to the stage in a daze, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The competition organizer, while handing him the award, said something that Arav would never forget. She said that winning wasn't just about having the most sophisticated project. It was about solving real problems, about creativity, about refusing to let circumstances limit imagination. She said Arav represented the true spirit of innovation, and that the country needed more young people like him. He called his family that night, and his mother cried with joy. His father's voice was thick with emotion. His sister screamed with excitement. Even Mrs. Kapoor, his teacher, got on the phone to congratulate him. The entire neighborhood had been waiting for his call, gathered at his house. They cheered so loudly that he had to move away from the phone for a moment. But Arav had no idea that the real story was just beginning. Vikram, the journalist, worked quickly. He wrote a detailed article about Arav, including photos of his scrap-built device and the story of how it was created. But he didn't just write a boring technical article. He wrote about the boy who learned programming by candlelight during power cuts, about the community that pooled money to send him to the competition, about the farmers who believed in a 15-year-old's crazy idea. He posted the article on his technology blog that night, along with a short video clip of Arav demonstrating his device. The title read, "Genius Teen Builds AI from Trash to Save Farmers." He also shared it on social media with the caption, "This is what real innovation looks like." The next morning, when Arav woke up in the cheap hotel room he was sharing with two other competition participants, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He had dozens of notifications, hundreds of them. The article had been shared thousands of times overnight. Technology forums were discussing his project. News websites were picking up the story. His inbox was flooded with messages from people he had never met. By afternoon, the video had gone viral. It had over 2 million views and was still climbing. National news channels were calling Vikram, asking for Arav's contact information. International technology websites were translating and sharing the article. The hashtag #Scrap2Innovation was trending. People were amazed that a 15-year-old from a small town, with no resources or formal training, had built something that agricultural technology companies were still struggling to make affordable. Arav was completely overwhelmed. He didn't understand how the internet worked at this scale. He had spent his life in a small town where news traveled by word of mouth. Now millions of people around the world knew his name. His phone kept ringing with calls from news channels wanting interviews. University professors were emailing, praising his work. Technology enthusiasts were discussing his code on forums, offering suggestions for improvement. But among all these messages, one email made his heart stop. It had a sender address that ended with ogoogle.com. At first, he thought it was a prank or a scam. People impersonated big companies all the time online. He had learned to be careful, but something made him open it anyway. The email was from someone named Priya Mehta, who introduced herself as a recruiter at Google's India division. She had seen the article and the video, and she was impressed. Google ran programs for young innovators, and they wanted to invite Arav to visit their Bangalore office. They would cover all expenses, including flights and accommodation. They wanted to meet him, learn more about his project, and discuss opportunities. Arav read the email 3 times, then 4, then 5. He clicked on Priya's name and found her professional profile online. She was real. This was real. Google, the company whose search engine he used at the library, whose YouTube platform had taught him everything he knew, that Google wanted to meet him, a boy who built devices from trash in his small bedroom. He immediately called his father, his voice shaking with excitement and disbelief. His father, a simple mechanic who barely understood what Google was, knew it was something big from his son's voice. The workshop fell silent as Arav explained the email. His father sat down on the floor, overwhelmed. He had spent his entire life repairing motorcycles, earning just enough to survive. And his son, his precious son, was being invited by one of the most powerful companies in the world. When Arav returned to his town 2 days later, he was treated like a hero. People lined the streets to welcome him, clapping and cheering. His school organized a special assembly where he shared his experience. Local newspapers ran front-page stories. The district magistrate invited him for tea and praised him as an inspiration for the youth. Little children looked at him with wonder, and he realized he had become a symbol of hope for his community. But Arav remained humble. He knew that luck had played a part. Vikram could have walked past his table like everyone else. The article might not have gone viral. The email from Google might have landed in his spam folder. Life was unpredictable and success was never guaranteed. But he also knew that he had worked hard, that he had refused to give up despite having every reason to quit, and that his determination had created opportunities. As he sat in his messy bedroom that night, surrounded by the same scrap metal and circuit boards, looking at his award certificate on the wall, Arav felt different. 3 weeks ago, he was just a boy with dreams that people called impossible. Now those dreams didn't seem so impossible anymore. The world was bigger than he thought, and it was full of people who valued innovation over resources, ideas over polish, determination over privilege. His journey to Google's office was still weeks away, but something had already changed forever. He had proven that genius didn't need fancy labs or expensive equipment. Sometimes all it needed was a curious mind, a good heart, and the courage to build something meaningful from whatever was available. The world had noticed, and now it was ready to see what else this boy from a small town could do. The weeks leading up to the Google visit felt surreal. Arav had never been on an airplane before, had never stayed in a proper hotel, had never even owned a suitcase. His mother borrowed one from a neighbor and carefully packed the few good clothes he owned. She added his awards, some photos of his device, and a notebook filled with ideas for improvements. His father gave him money for emergencies, money saved from extra repair work he had taken on specifically for this trip. The entire neighborhood came to see him off at the railway station. His journey would start with a train to the nearest city with an airport, then a flight to Bangalore. Mrs. Kapoor gave him last-minute advice about professional behavior. His uncle reminded him to stay humble. His sister made him promise to take lots of photos. Even the junkyard owner came, patting him on the back and saying he always knew the boy was special. When Arav boarded the flight, he pressed his face against the window like a child, watching the ground fall away beneath him. He had dreamed about flying, but never imagined it would happen so soon. Everything about the experience amazed him. The clouds below, the tiny houses and roads, the realization of how vast the world actually was. He barely touched the airplane food, too excited and nervous to eat. Landing in Bangalore was like stepping into another universe. The airport was enormous, clean, and bustling with travelers who looked like they flew every day. Arav clutched his borrowed suitcase and followed the signs, feeling small and out of place. A professional driver waited outside with a sign bearing his name. The car was more luxurious than anything he had ever sat in, with air conditioning so cold he had to ask if it could be turned down. As they drove through Bangalore's streets, Arav couldn't stop staring. The buildings were tall and modern, the roads were smooth and wide, and everywhere he looked he saw technology companies and startups. This was a different India than the one he knew, an India of wealth and opportunity that felt both inspiring and intimidating. His small town with its dusty streets and struggling farmers seemed like it belonged to a different country entirely. The hotel where Google had booked him was nicer than he imagined possible. The room had a huge bed, a television bigger than any he had seen, and a bathroom with hot water that actually worked. He called his family immediately, describing everything in amazed whispers. His mother told him to eat properly and get good sleep. His father just kept saying how proud he was, his voice breaking with emotion. That night Arav couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the next day, about meeting actual Google engineers, about walking into the company he had only ever seen in photos and videos. What would they ask him? What if they realized he wasn't as smart as they thought? What if his device seemed primitive and silly to people who worked with cutting-edge technology every day? His mind raced with worries until exhaustion finally pulled him into restless sleep. The next morning, the same driver picked him up and drove to Google's office. When they arrived, Arav simply stared. The campus was like something from a movie, with colorful buildings, open spaces, employees riding bicycles between offices, and an atmosphere that felt more like a university than a workplace. People wore casual clothes and everyone seemed relaxed and happy. It was nothing like the serious formal offices he had imagined. Priya Mehta met him at the reception, a warm smile on her face. She was young, friendly, and immediately put him at ease. She gave him a visitor's badge and took him on a tour of the campus. They walked past cafeterias with free food, game rooms with pool tables and video games, nap pods where employees could rest, and meeting rooms with names like Sherlock and Gandalf. Google employees waved at him, and some recognized him from the viral video, giving him thumbs up. But the real program began when Priya brought him to a conference room where about 15 people waited. Engineers, managers, and senior leaders all there to meet the boy who had built AI from scrap. Arav's hands were sweating as he set up his device on the table. It looked even more makeshift here in Google's polished environment, but no one seemed to judge it. Instead, they leaned forward with genuine curiosity. He started his presentation, his voice shaky at first but growing stronger as he explained his journey. He talked about the problem, about farmers and crop diseases, about learning machine learning from YouTube, about building the solar panel from broken garden lights. The Google engineers listened intently, occasionally nodding or taking notes. When he finished, there was a moment of silence, and then someone started clapping, and then everyone joined in. The questions came fast. How did he optimize the model to run on such limited hardware? What frameworks did he use? How did he collect and label his training data? Where did he learn about convolutional neural networks? These were smart people asking smart questions, and Arav answered as best as he could. Sometimes he admitted he didn't know something, that he had figured it out through trial and error rather than proper training, but his honesty seemed to impress them more than if he had pretended to know everything. Then a senior engineer named Rajesh, who led one of Google's AI research teams, asked Arav a complex technical question about optimizing his algorithm for better accuracy. It was about adjusting the model's parameters to reduce false positives without increasing false negatives. Arav thought for a moment, then walked to the whiteboard and started drawing diagrams and writing pseudocode. His explanation wasn't textbook perfect, but it was clever and showed deep understanding of the underlying principles. He had discovered through experimentation what researchers usually learned through formal study. He talked about how he had tried different approaches, what worked and what didn't, and why he thought certain modifications would improve performance. Rajesh listened carefully, occasionally asking follow-up questions, and by the end, he was nodding with what looked like genuine respect. After the technical session, they took Arav to lunch at one of the campus cafeterias. The food was incredible, and there was so much variety that Arav didn't know where to start. A young engineer named Kartik sat with him and shared his own story. He had come from a small town too, had struggled to get proper education but had never given up on learning. He told Arav that Google valued problem solvers, people who could think creatively and work with constraints. Having every resource made things easier, but it didn't necessarily make better innovators. That afternoon, they brought Arav to a lab where they showed him projects that weren't yet public. Self-driving car algorithms, advanced image recognition systems, natural language processing models that could understand context and emotion. Arav was like a kid in a candy store asking questions, wanting to understand everything. The engineers were patient, explaining concepts, showing him code, treating him not like a visitor but like a fellow enthusiast. Then came the conversation that would change everything. Priya and Rajesh sat down with Arav in a quiet meeting room. They explained that Google ran various programs for exceptional young talents, but Arav was different. He was only 16, still in school with no formal degree or certifications. But his self-learning ability, his practical approach to problem solving, and his determination to use technology for social good aligned perfectly with Google's values. Rajesh said something that Arav would remember forever. He said that Google didn't need another engineer who had memorized algorithms from textbooks. They needed people who understood real problems, who could innovate with constraints, who saw technology as a tool to help people rather than just a way to make profits. Arav was that kind of person, and they wanted him to be part of their team. Then Priya explained the offer. Google wanted to hire Arav as a part-time research assistant in their AI for social good division. He would work remotely so he could continue his education. They would provide him with proper equipment, mentorship from senior engineers, and access to resources to develop his crop disease detection system properly. The salary they mentioned made Arav's head spin. It was more money than his father earned in a year, and they were offering it to a 16-year-old who hadn't even finished school yet. But there was more. They would also sponsor his complete education, including university when he was ready. They would connect him with agricultural experts to make his device more effective. They would help him scale the project, so it could reach farmers across India and eventually other developing countries. This wasn't just a job offer. It was an opportunity to turn his small bedroom project into something that could genuinely change lives. Arav sat there, stunned. He thought about his father's repair shop, about his mother selling vegetables before dawn, about sleeping next to his overheating laptop waiting for code to compile, about the bullies at school who called him garbage boy, about the principal who said poor kids should learn trades instead of dreaming big. All of that struggle, all of those nights spent learning by candlelight, all of those failures and restarts, they had led to this moment. He asked if he could call his parents before giving an answer, even though he already knew what he wanted to say. Priya smiled and said, of course, take all the time he needed. Arav went outside to the beautiful campus, sat on a bench under a tree and called home with shaking fingers. His mother answered, and he could barely speak through his emotions. He told them about the offer, about the job, about the salary, about the opportunity to continue his project with real resources. His mother started crying and his father took the phone. There was a long silence, and then his father said something simple but profound. He said that Arav should do whatever made him happy, but that they were proud of him no matter what he decided. They had always believed in him even when nobody else did, but Arav already knew his answer. He went back inside and told Priya and Rajesh that he would be honored to accept the offer. He had only one condition. He wanted his crop disease detection device to remain open source and free for farmers. He didn't want it to become an expensive product that only rich agricultural companies could afford. The whole point was to help people like his uncle, and that mission couldn't change. Rajesh smiled and said that was exactly the kind of thinking Google valued. They agreed immediately. The device would be open source, and Google would even help manufacture affordable units to distribute in farming communities. They would work with agricultural organizations and government agencies to get it into the hands of farmers who needed it most. That evening, as Arav sat in his hotel room, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. He was still the same boy, still wearing the same faded clothes, still with oil stains under his fingernails that never quite washed out. But everything had changed. He had walked into Google as a curious visitor, and he was leaving as their youngest employee in India. He thought about the journey, about how a pile of electronic trash had become his education, about how YouTube videos watched at a library had become his university, about how a desire to help his uncle had become a project that interested one of the world's biggest companies. It seemed impossible, like a story someone made up to inspire people. But it was real, and it was his life. Before sleeping, Arav made a list in his notebook. He wrote down things he wanted to learn, improvements for his device, ideas for other projects that could help his community. The Google job was amazing, but it was just the beginning. He had proven that poverty didn't determine potential, that genius could bloom anywhere if given a chance. Now he wanted to prove that one person, no matter how young or poor, could make a difference that mattered. Tomorrow he would fly home to his small town, back to his cramped bedroom and his worried parents, back to his school where some teachers still doubted him. But he was returning different, carrying not just an award but a partnership with Google, carrying not just hope but actual resources to make his dreams real. The boy who learned from trash was going to change the world, one scrap of innovation at a time. When Arav's flight landed and he took the train back to his town, the entire community was waiting at the station. They had hung banners, brought flowers, and arranged a small celebration. Children held signs calling him their hero. His parents stood at the front, his mother wiping tears, his father trying to maintain composure but failing. The moment Arav stepped off the train, the crowd erupted in cheers. He wasn't just their local boy anymore. He was proof that their town could produce excellence. But Arav didn't want the attention to change him. The next day, he was back in his father's workshop, back in his messy bedroom with its stained walls and broken furniture. Google had sent him a new laptop, a professional camera, and proper electronic components. But he kept his old scrap collection. It reminded him where he came from, and he never wanted to forget that. His partnership with Google began immediately. Every week he had video calls with Rajesh and other engineers who mentored him. They taught him advanced concepts, reviewed his code, and helped him understand things that would have taken years to figure out alone. But they also learned from him. His unconventional approaches, born from necessity rather than textbook learning, sometimes offered fresh perspectives on problems they had been tackling for months. Working on his project became more serious now. Google connected him with agricultural scientists who specialized in plant diseases. They helped him expand his database, teaching him about diseases he had never encountered. His AI model grew from recognizing 5 diseases to 20, then 50. The accuracy improved from 78% to over 93%. What started as a bedroom experiment was becoming a legitimate agricultural tool. But the most important part was getting the device to actual farmers. Google helped manufacture 500 units of an improved version, still affordable but more reliable than Arav's original prototype. They partnered with farming cooperatives and government agricultural departments to distribute them. Arav's uncle was among the first to receive one, and he tested it thoroughly in his fields.